I am feeling super energized right now because I am coming off of the heels of having just wrapped up a conversation with the very incredible, fabulous Ivy League sister, Jossie Haines. Jossie is a graduate from Princeton University. She was a student there when she was only 16 years old. And from there, she went on to blaze a trail in the tech industry. This woman is total badass. She cares deeply about mentorship, about supporting women, and about making sure that your career doesn't burn you out. So I'm so excited to share this conversation with you. If you are a woman struggling in a male-dominated culture, you are going to love this conversation. Enjoy.
All right, so let's talk back about so I'm enamored with the Ivy League woman. Like that's why I built this community because I find her so fascinating because it's an interesting time in our life when we go to college, right? We're somewhere between 17, 18 years old typically. And there's all this expectation and hubbub about like what's next, where are you going? And we certainly grew up in a generation when that was sort of the like expectation. I think things are shifting now, actually. People
Mm-hmm.
are re-questioning that. But at our time, it was like, that's just what you're going to do. And I think that it's really interesting with all that pressure, like how we land, where we land, and at these schools, and what that meant for you at that time, bringing yourself back to 18-year-old Josie, and 4 years later when you finished, what that then looked like and meant for you. So can you
Yeah,
bring us back?
absolutely. So I was actually a little bit younger than that. So I'm from Puerto Rico. So when I was already young in school because when I moved from Puerto Rico to Florida, I ended up skipping kindergarten. So I was already young. And then I ended up graduating high school in 3 years. I actually, and it's kind of funny. It was one of these things where like I loved my parents. I love my parents dearly, but I was not my dad and I were having some teenage struggling challenges, and how does the smart girl end up dealing with it? I'm like, well, I'll get out of the house by graduating in 3 years. That's that's how I solved that problem. Was I'll just leave the house by graduating early.
I love that.
I
You're controlling your controllables like no other. That's great.
So I actually graduated high school on my 16th birthday, or a few days before my 16th birthday. And so actually, the whole applying to Princeton process was very fascinating. Like, yes, it was. I knew. So I decided this like the summer before my senior year. I was like, I am graduating in 3 years. I'm gonna graduate this year. I'm gonna figure it out. My mom had been a university professor, and so yes, there was no question I was going to college, right? Like that was very much like yes, and I wanted to. Like I loved to study, right? But if you'd asked me at the time when I first started looking at colleges, like, was I going to was going to an Ivy League my dream? Like, no, I hadn't really honestly even thought about it. My college counselor, she's like, Josie, you're applying to an Ivy League school. So myself and two boys applied to go to Princeton, early admission. I was the only one who got in. And but one of the things I specifically remember about this is them saying, first them being upset because like they were like this was one of their like dreams. They
Dreams.
had to get into an Ivy League, and how dare the girl who didn't even really want to get into the Ivy League be the one who got into the Ivy League. And of course, you get the whole like, oh, well, and you also use the fact that you're Puerto Rican. So you got the whole like affirmative action,
Right.
like that's
You're
why
the
you got
double
in.
whammy. You're a woman
Yeah.
and you were a Puerto Rican. Got it. Oh my gosh. That
So that was kind of like what my going into this, but then it kind of was like, hell yes, I'm gonna go. I got in. Of course I'm gonna go. Screw you guys. And so yeah, that's how I
Wow.
ended
Okay.
up at Princeton at the age of 16.
Yeah. How was it for you when you graduated? Did you have like a lot of times I think when you go to a school like an Ivy League, even though they're liberal arts, there's still a little bit of a mindset that you're going to go down one of these more traditional paths. Um, and whether it's finance or medical or legal or academic. Now, I know you've got a tech background. Did you have a very clear, what was that like for you, shifting out
Oh,
of
so
school
that's
mode?
that's also a very interesting story. So my undergrad degree is in chemistry and material science. So because my parents really wanted me to be a doctor. Now, I love computers. I got my first computer when I was 5 years old. I love technology. My brother was an electrical engineer. And so I thought about like, well, even though my parents want me to be a chemistry major, let me try pursuing taking some software engineering classes when I was in college. Now, the problem ended up being, so I took CS 101. And the professor who was teaching it that quarter ended up being somebody who'd only ever taught grad students. Like he was basically forced to teach this class. And he had no idea how to actually teach programming to people. Like there was just almost this expectation that the only way you're going to succeed in this class is if you actually already know how to program. Like
Jeez.
the average in the class final was a 19 out of 120.
Oh,
Like the dean of the department ended up having to take over the class the following semester because it was so bad,
oh
right?
gosh.
Like,
Okay. So what
so I was
happened?
like, so at that point, I was like, well, I don't have it. I tried taking the next class and I was like, I can't do this, like, especially not at like Princeton level classes. So I was like, all right, I'm going to get my chemistry degree. And then my junior year, I actually almost even considered leaving Princeton and going to Georgetown or something because I was just like, I don't know that I'm happy with this. But then I realized something. I realized that if I got a minor in material science, I could take less chemistry classes and I could take more engineering classes and all of the engineering. So I literally took like one class in every engineering department at Princeton. So yeah, it was like the liberal science of Josie department or something. Like I basically made up like what I needed to take to graduate. I basically was like, what is the minimum requirements of chemistry I can do so I can graduate and like still get a degree. So I had a minor in
It sounds
material
like wait,
science.
I just want to call this out. It sounds like you actually started once again carved your own path.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yes. So then obviously, graduation comes around and I'm not going to grad school. So I knew I had to get a job, right? And um I ended up landing a job as a technical consultant for PricewaterhouseCoopers. And so they sent everybody to a 3-month coding boot camp in Florida as your first 3 months of the job. And they taught us how to code. And I actually picked it up really, really quickly. And I was really good at it. I was like teaching all my colleagues how to do it. And so they actually sent me out here to the Bay Area to a training on a now like non-existent technology called Broad Vision. And that week pretty much changed my life. I fell in love with the Bay Area. This was 1999. It was the middle of the dot-com boom. There was tech. Everybody in the world thought technology, it was like the more innocent times. Tech is going to make the world a better place. So I flew out here. I interviewed at a bunch of little dot-com startups. I got a job as a web engineer at one of them. And so in February of 2000, I moved out here knowing literally 2 people, I think, in all of California. and started my tech career as a little a web software engineer, and so that is the Josie the Josie career start there.
Oh my gosh. Wow. But it's really unfolded for you, like, and it's taken so many twists and turns. Now, because you're so passionate now about helping women in tech and filling this like mass exodus that seems to be happening, what can you speak into like what was it like for you being a woman in tech in those early 2000 years?
So it was interesting. I feel like in my first few roles, like I didn't notice the bias quite as much. We actually had a reasonable number of women in my very first company. Then at the second company, I was like one of two women in engineering, but everyone just joked around with me. And then when I worked at Sun, actually half my team was women, which was actually kind of cool, and very rare, as I later learned. What I was actually most frustrated about was the fact that people kept um, discriminating because I didn't have a computer science degree. And so part of it actually might have been because I was a woman in tech, but at the time, I think I really just was like, people just don't want to respect me because I don't have a CS degree. So when I left Sun in 2005, I actually went and got my master's in computer science at UC Santa Cruz while working at NetApp part-time. And then, at NetApp, I think I experienced, again, some bias, but again, I didn't really connect the dots. I was told
Mhm.
I wasn't going to be promoted unless like the male project lead was promoted first. And at the time I was like, okay, I guess that's just how corporate politics works. And then I ended up realizing I was like, wait, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
um
Do you
and
know
then
what
I think
caused that light bulb to go off? Like, is that just did someone name it, call it out for you? Was it
so it actually was when I was at Zynga that the light bulb
okay?
kind of went off. And it was actually because I got really lucky. So Zynga is a gaming company. So I joined in 2010. We were at 1,000 people when I joined. We went to 2,000 people in my first year. Yeah, it was kind of crazy. And I actually did really well at Zynga. I went from software engineer to director of engineering in 3 years. When I was at Zynga, I was the first engineer on a game. I ended up then running the game live launch. We had like 10 million daily active users. I then ended up running the entire ads engineering, which was 25% of Zynga's revenue, right? So I did very well when I was in Zynga.
Yeah.
But the reason I can say that I did well was most of that time I worked for a manager who is actually somebody I had worked with at NetApp who actually really helped be my sponsor, right? And really helped advocate for my career. I also then ended up, I joined like Women at Zynga. I started talking to other women, and gaming, even more so than tech in general, is has very few women in it and has even more issues when it comes to bias and things like that. And I was talking to some other women and I was realizing, I was like, wait, like they are not having the same story that I just did in my career here. Like they have dealt with some serious bias. Like I know people who had to deal with like sexual harassment, right? Like I was like, oh, this is really an issue. Like women in tech really. And so during my time at Zynga, I really started advocating for women in tech. Like that's really when I kind of like the light bulb kind of hit of like, okay, I actually have ended up here. Um and I've gotten lucky in some ways, and I've also advocated for myself and crafted my own career, but not everybody has all the opportunities I have had. So let me make sure that I am helping other women. Um, in the middle of my time at Zynga, my mom passed away. I ended up moving back to Florida for 9 months to take care of my dad. He started doing better, and I realized I hated Florida. Nothing against Florida, it just was not where I meant to live in my life. Ended up back in California, and I'm actually back at Zynga for another year. And then I went to Apple. And at this point, I was like very strong in my like, I really want to advocate for women. I joined Apple and noticed something, which was there was women at Apple, there was like the ERG and all that stuff, but it was like we had like there was a meeting in a big like huge space once a month, and it was somebody presenting. And I was like, how is this actually supporting women? Like we're not
Was the
actually.
presenter, what was the like the basis
I
of
mean,
some of these
it was
presentations?
topics. I mean, it was topics that were useful, right? Like it would be on like communication and things like that. So I'm not saying it was harmful, but it's also not like I was like, this also isn't going to really help the women who are in the specific situations where they actually need to have a conversation with somebody else about what's going on. And I was the first female engineering leader on the Siri team. And Siri had been around
Wow.
for 4 years at that point.
Wow. This is still during Steve Jobs, right? He's
No,
here.
this
Oh,
is
here.
this
Okay.
is post. So
Post.
this was 2016. 2016.
Okay.
And so
Wow.
I start Women at Siri, and I say, you know, like let us actually advocate. So we actually would meet like I think it was like every other week. There was like a big conference room in the middle of the Siri building. I think there was about 1,000 people in Siri. And I remember specifically because we would meet right before the big like product management meeting when we went over the schedule. So that happened at 1, and we would meet at lunchtime at noon. And every time we would meet, we'd always have somebody comment walking into the next meeting going like, what are a bunch of women doing in this room together? Like literally, it was so rare.
Right, right. And it actually peaked to like, wait, what's happening here? Like, if it was a bunch of men, no one would think anything twice of it. It would just be what it would be.
Exactly.
But the
But
fact that
people
there was
would
a pool
comment.
of
They'd be
women,
like, what is a bunch of
that's
women
really
doing
telling.
together? And I was just
Right.
like, what is like going on? And I would say like I learned so much about like leadership and being a good leader. Like Apple has so much amazing training, and yet at the same time I dealt with a lot of bias like myself when I was at Apple. And because in some ways I was leading Women at Siri, I hadn't gotten to the point in my life yet where I realized I could be vulnerable too. So I felt very
Mm.
isolated and alone, right? I
Mm.
felt very much like I'm here to support these women, but I'm not here to get supported myself.
Right. That's
And
such a good call out, Josie. Glad you're saying that because I think there's a
yeah,
really big distinction. I think there's a lot of women at the top that are holding that space, but then they're being the strong one everywhere. It's like,
right.
wait.
And it's like we need to be held too, right? Like it was interesting, like a few weeks ago I went to like a small leadership retreat at 1440, which is in the Santa Cruz Mountains. I love going there. And I mean, I could have literally taught the leadership retreat. Like it's the same things I teach and all this stuff. So it's not like I went there to quote unquote learn anything new. But for me, it's about like, well, first I love going to 1440's campus because I can just like drop my stress level in like 10 minutes. It's great. And the food is amazing. But it's also just like I want to just feel held by somebody else, right? Yes, I can teach these things, but you know what? Like, it's always interesting to see how somebody else does something. And it's also just really nice to be not the one in the seat and feeling like, no, I'm here to have somebody else support me. Right.
Mm.
Like, and I don't have to always just be the one who is on.
Yeah.
So, going back to Women at Siri, though, one of the things I really wanted to start was a mentorship program.
Mm.
But the VP who ran Siri at the time didn't believe in mentorship. Like
Say
you can't
more.
make
Say
this
more about
stuff
that.
up. Like you
Right.
can't
Yeah.
make this stuff up. So I was not allowed to start a mentoring program. And I was
Can
like,
you can
okay.
you do you have any context on that? Just a little bit? Like what
Well,
was
I
a
mean, this is
distraction? What was
how,
the
so he didn't actually even directly have a conversation with me about it. He literally had his executive admin who attended the meeting say, well, Josie, I know you really want to start that, but he doesn't really support it. So let's not do that. Like, so I don't know. Like, I don't know why the 50, 60-year-old white man didn't believe in mentoring. Maybe he just got all the opportunities handed to him. I don't know. But it was, and I just kept feeling more isolated, alone. I was dealing with some really challenging management situation with a few of the engineers on my team who everyone loved, but ironically were having challenges with me and the other female project manager who was on the team. But it was our problem, not their problem. And so I left Apple in like January. Oh, and then I would teach Girls Who Code on Fridays for those 2 years. And I literally felt like I had to sneak out of the building so that people wouldn't look at me. Like, why are you leaving work at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon?
Hmm.
And so by the
And you were
time I
doing
left,
such amazing work. You were doing something so like gosh,
yeah,
you were sneaking out to go do the thing that's like, oh,
yep.
sneaking to help girls with code get more coders, right? Like that are women. Better hide that and do that in hiding. Yeah.
But I mean, and there was just like this toxic culture in some ways. Like everybody would get back on, and this is not like, I'm not really like, and every organization in Apple is run very differently just because of how Apple's kind of segregated, right? So I'm not trying to go on like an Apple bashing experience here. Like I said, there's things like I do value about my time at Apple. I learned a ton about how to be a better leader. I learned how you build things at that scale, both for the good and the bad, considering, Apple does it in a very interesting and unique way. But one of the things that I couldn't deal with was the fact that there was this unspoken culture with the managers and the project managers where around 7 to 8 o'clock at night, everyone would get back online and basically work for a few more hours. And nobody ever told you have to do this. But if you didn't, it was noticed. And you'd also wake up with hundreds of emails in your inbox, right? And I was just like, no, like, I'm not doing this. Like, I am not, like, I want to live my life. Like, I am not here to do this. And so in January of 2018, I left Apple and I was burnt out. I was going through imposter syndrome. I actually, despite the fact that I had one of my employees tell me I was the best manager he'd ever had, and other people tell me I was a great manager, I literally thought I was an awful manager. I was like, I need to leave the tech industry. I am done with this. I can't, I was done. I was like, and so I gave myself 6 months off. I had no idea what I was going to do next. And I was just like, you know what? I am tired. I am done. And so I actually focused on like personal development and self-care and journaling, all these things I'd never given myself space to do. Had a few realizations. One is I love tech. I've been playing with computers since I was 5, right? Like I did not want to leave the tech industry, but I also wanted to work somewhere that actually cared about inclusion. And so I was approached to work at Tile. And a new CEO had just joined, and they wanted me to come in and be their platform engineering director to basically integrate the tiles with pretty much every other major tech company. So putting it into like Google Home and Alexa. I ended up working with Intel to put it into laptops. And so I said to him, I was like, look, if you want to hire me as your platform engineering director, would love to. However, I want to work somewhere where inclusion is not lip service, right? I want to start the mentoring program that I was not allowed to start at Apple, and I want to help lead your DEI efforts. And he surprised me. And he actually said, I actually promised my wife and daughters I wanted to make Tal one of the best places for women to work in the Valley. And so I loved that. And so I joined and we delivered on that promise. And, I want to be clear, like, it wasn't just the two of us, like, it was a team effort. The head of people was super supportive. The executive team in general was super supportive, right? And we really created an inclusive, unique culture that to this day, I still have former Tile employees message me and say, Josie, I really miss what we created. Like, thank you.
Mm.
Like people have gone to other companies and they're like, I realize now like what we had created was really unique and special.
Yeah. Wow.
And so that really inspired me. So I ended up heading up DEI at Tile. I then, in the middle of COVID, got my boss promoted to CTO, myself to VP of engineering, so we could double the engineering team size. I completely restructured how our leadership was done, and we did that in 4.5 months while keeping our inclusive culture. And I kind of realized I'd done it, and I wanted to be making an impact at more than one company at a time. And so that's what inspired me in 2022 to start my own business.
Gosh, that's so inspiring. It's so inspiring. And it's also interesting for me to hear how it's evolved and like you speaking your truth and you setting sort of boundaries and limits for yourself and just saying like, no, I'm not going to tolerate, no, I'm not going to fall into that unspoken culture, which I think so many of us do end up falling into those
Mm-hmm.
unspoken cultures. And it's just what it is. And then Juice just saying like, well, I'm not going to play that game and I'm not going to change it. So I'm going to probably have to leave, and finding your own, finding a new place where you're setting your terms and conditions,
Yep.
right? Like up front,
Yeah, yeah.
not
I
waiting to
think
get
most
in
people
there.
are like, you said that to the CEO. I'm like, yeah, I wasn't going to take the job. Like, I literally was not going to take the job. I had decided when I left Apple, I had decided I was like, I am not ever going through a full like tech interview process to land a job again. And like that this ended up being one of those situations because I had ended up contracting for them for a while because the VP was actually a friend of mine who had been my manager at Zynga and at NetApp, right?
Yeah.
And he really needed somebody to come help with the web team. And I was like, I'm not ready to do any work. And he's like, Josie, you don't have to, like, he's just like, code for 15 hours a week. Like, that's all I need. I was like, okay. That, if that's all you want from me, that's fine. I will help doing that sounds fun. Like it was one of these
Yeah.
like doing that sounds fun. And so like I had proven myself and everyone like really wanted me to join. And so it was one of these things where I literally was just like, okay, yeah, sure. I'll do this, but I'm doing this under my rules. And
Yeah.
I mean it's basically been that way since. So,
Yeah. I had a mentor that said the line, don't ask, don't get. And I just love that.
yep.
Like, because it's one of those we don't, especially for women, reminding ourselves, one, like, why are we asking for this? And, what does it mean to us? And how can we articulate in a way maybe that someone's either going to like, it's going to click with them or it's not. But you at least have spoken your truth and you have, and I think you do this a lot. I was reading through your website, like you tie a lot of your coaching to saying like, if they're asking like, what's the business impact that you're
Mhm.
bringing, for the person though to always think like, this is how it's also going to help your business or your company or your,
Yeah.
so I feel like that's probably a super skill of yours to be able to connect those dots.
Yes, I say that my superpower is being able to look at the big picture and also then zoom straight into the details too. Like I can look
Yeah.
at really both levels, right? I can look at the big picture and be like, this is your map. Like this is what you need. And then I can also look into the details and be like, and these are the little things we need to be doing along the way to get there.
Yeah.
And it's in both areas. Like I can apply it to
That's
leadership and I also can apply it to engineering, right? And I mean the big thing I also tell women is that no just means no right now. No does not mean no forever, right? So if you get a no, like it's not the end of the world. Just ask again later, right? Like
yeah.
reframe it. Did I get the VP role the second I asked for it? No, it took me like 3 months of negotiating after I created the proposal and shared it, right? But there was no plans for there to be like a CTO and a VP of engineering, right? Like I just was like, this is going to happen and this is what we're going to do. And here's a proposal of why it works for the business, right? But I'm
Yeah.
not going to sit here and say like I didn't want to become a VP. Of course, the reason I advocated for it was because I wanted to be a VP, but I also saw that it was a win-win for the organization, right? And like I think that's where we have to look at things. I also see women so often, we're taught to be the good little girl, right? The like, you work hard, you'll get your promotion, you don't, you stay in your little box. And guess what? At the beginning of your career, that might work, right? You might get your first promotion or two from just working hard alone. And so that ends up then also reinforcing this narrative that, yeah, that's how this works, right? And it's like, you don't realize that your male counterparts are going around asking for those promotions, like advocating for all the things that they're doing day in and day out. And then you're told, like, oh, if you do that, then you're like bragging or like, how dare you like say these things? And it's like, no, speak up. Ask for what you want. Like, don't just wait for promotion time and performance review time to ask. It's actually the worst time to ask, and I really believe like I want women to realize they can architect their career by advocating for themselves. Like, this is not something that has to be reactive, right? I think so often women feel completely powerless and they're like, we're just going to do what we're told we need to do. And we'll just sit back and wait, or like, okay, they said no. Okay. And it's like, all right, like I'm not saying you're always going to get exactly what you want, but like how can you be proactive and like running towards something instead of running away from something, right? Like
Mm.
what breaks my heart is, over 50% of women leave the tech industry by the age of 35. And so often
Why do you think that is? What's your take
Oh,
on that?
it's because of unfair treatment, bias, right? It's interesting because a lot of people think it's because women are going to go start a family, and not that that's not a reason, but actually the research shows that that's not the top reason. The top reason is the bias and unfair treatment, and I call it like having your inequity bucket overflow. So I say every time you have a microaggression happen, you get a little drop in your inequity bucket, and eventually those drops add up and the bucket overflows. And so I think really it's about, you know, realizing, hey, yeah, this happens, right? Like, we're not going to be able to, like, I want to change the world, but we're not going to change the world overnight. Bias is going to be a thing that happens. These things happen. But what makes me really sad is that I so often see women basically running away from a career they want to be doing because of these things instead of running towards the thing that they want to be doing, right? And like
Okay, I have a
setting
question for
themselves
you. I
up
have a
for
question for
success.
you.
Yeah.
So, how have you coached or mentored women that are running towards the career they want, and then they have some sort of manager that's like, "Oh, watch out for Sarah. She's like overly ambitious." You've seen like I
No,
remember
yeah,
hearing that in corporate, right?
absolutely. And I
And
think
so,
that is where having a coach, a mentor, a sponsor, a community, like whatever it is, like I tell people, like have somebody in your back pocket, right? When I left Apple, I had this huge realization that I had no network of women. Like I had nobody I could really talk to about these things. So like I was completely isolated and completely alone, which is most likely why I ended up feeling the way I did by the time I left and I was running away. And so I made it a very intentional part of my life to really build my network over the next 5 years, which is how I was able to then start my business and have it be successful very quickly because I had built a network over 5 years to make it a reality, right? Like it didn't just happen overnight.
Right.
And I think that is where I tell women it's like there are going to be bad managers at good companies. There's going to be bad companies. There's going to be bad organizations within good companies, right? And
Yeah.
but there are places out there where you can thrive. Is it hard? Yeah, sometimes you have to find a few bad apples and then you find the place that's good, right? But if this is really what you want to be doing, then don't give up on that. And in the meantime, find support to help you get through the challenging times, right? One of my
Yeah.
current coaching clients, when she came to me, she she was very close to just quitting her job. She
Yeah.
she's a senior manager. She was having lots of toxic behavior from some of her employees, and she was just like she was literally like having like anxiety and stress and all of
Mhm.
these things. And I said to her, I was like, look, we're not going to make things perfect in your workplace. Do I think someday you might want to go find another job at some other company? Yeah, like I think so. But what I can do is help you feel a lot more supported so that you can actually like thrive at this company. And she tells me on a regular basis, she's like, Josie, if we hadn't been working together, I would have quit by now. And
Yeah.
are things
Right.
perfect at her company? No. There's the behavior is still there. She's still dealing with some of these challenges, but I really help her with the mindset shifts, right? Like,
Yeah.
what is in your zone of control and what is outside of your zone of control? And if it is outside of your zone of control, then let it go. This is so much more about them than it is anything
Yeah.
to do a reflection on you. And so often is the case. But yet you need somebody to tell you, like, it is okay. And like that in and of itself can make the biggest difference, even if like the situation still ultimately it's pretty much the same situation.
Right. Yeah. That's so true. It's taking that power back and feeling like though that you are at least managing through it and not just to your like reactive. Everything doesn't have to be reactive. It's feeling much more resilient
Mm-hmm.
right through those storms. Okay, I want to shift us into those rapid fire questions and I want to get a
All
sense
right.
of where you land on them. So, first one, when you think of people pleasing, perfectionism, and performing kind of wrapped in the imposter syndrome, um, which one is the biggest thorn on your rosebud stem?
Oh, people pleasing. 100% people pleasing.
Can you say a little bit more? Like what, where have you most recently seen yourself kind of falling into that?
So, I mean, I think I was raised to be the good little girl, right? And I mean, I still have to catch myself all the time, right? Actually, this week, in fact, somebody I have like a discovery call calendar for new coaching clients, right? And somebody I've known for a while just like booked a call on my calendar. And I was just like, at first, I was just like, kind of annoyed because it's not like it's not that I'm not happy to meet with her, but it's like reach out and like we can set up a time. Like there's a reason like that calendar is not just there as a free for all like book time on my calendar, right?
Right.
And at first I was like, oh, but I don't want to upset her. Like, should I reach out to her? Should I just leave it on the calendar? And I was like, wait, like, this is bugging me. And I can reach out and say, like, hey, like, I'm happy to meet, but like, this is really for discovery calls. Like, can we like actually just like set aside a time for, because like I'm happy to block that time right now for a discovery call, but that time wasn't there for socialization, right?
Right.
Like I
Right.
actually have like
Exactly.
work to do, and I'm happy to set aside socialization time, but it's
It's a
not
different intent.
then.
Different intent.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you do it? Did you mention it to her?
Yep. Yep. So I haven't heard back yet. So, but
Okay.
yes, I was like, yes, we're having this conversation.
You're taking control of your controllables. I love it. I love it. All right. Second question. What's a lie that you tell yourself?
Ooh. So this is one I've been working on a lot recently, and it is that and I think I'm very close to shifting it, but it is that success and like I need to work hard so that I'm not making other people like feel bad from like the success point of view. Like hard work, success means hard work, and if you're not working hard, then like you're not working enough or something, or you're not like volunteering
Earning it,
enough of your
maybe?
time. Yeah, it's like so yes, it's very much this like I'm allowed to just want to spend like a day just laying on my hammock doing nothing and still can be successful and earn as much money as I want. And like if other people have a problem with that because they're working 60 to 80-hour weeks, like that's on them, not on me.
That's so interesting. That one really lands with me. I was reminding, like, when we opened up the Ivy League Sisters community in the end of June, and I had done it in a way that was I was on vacation too, and I just had like, I wasn't in this whole like launch plan mode and I'm going to do all these things. Like, I kind of just felt like I had a couple hands tied behind my back because I was on vacation. I'm like, why did I plan for it during this time? But the interesting thing was it all worked out. Like the women the number we were hoping to have enter in was met. And there was this little voice that said, but you didn't earn it and you didn't work hard enough. It was like, where did that come from? Like, there was something that didn't like the ease of it. Like, the
Yep.
ego wanted it to feel harder. It wanted to feel like, but you did all the workshops, you did all these things. And it was like, wait, can it be this easy? Like, can it flow to me how it's meant to? Right?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's, and this can go under a little bit of the woo category, but one of the things I've been really diving into recently is like human design.
What are you?
And
What are
I'm a
you?
projector.
Me
So
too.
yeah, so we're all about the energetics of waiting for the invitation, right? And so that is very hard for me because I very much have been acting like, no, 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 go, 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 hard work. And I have realized every time in my business that I have tried to launch something and I have tried to put too much effort into it, it actually fails. Like it actually does not succeed. And yet, like it was funny because so I've been on top of coaching, I also have a fractional engineering leadership role, which is great because I get to use the engineering side of my brain and I love that. And so I was busy the last week of July. We were at an on-site for the week, and I was trying to plan this master class in like for actually it was supposed to be next week. And I just had this realization on Wednesday when I had my coaching call with my business coach, and I'm like, I just want to get the master class over with. Like, I just feel exhausted. I have no time, right? And she says, you should just cancel it. And I'm like, what? And she's like, yeah, you should just cancel it. And I'm like, okay. But I'm like, how am I going to get the clients I want? She's like, just give yourself the energy and the space and focus on the energetics of doing it. And I was like, okay. All right, I trust you. So I canceled the master class. I was a little wobbly over the weekend, but I was like, no, it's good. I feel like I have space. I have time again in August. Like literally on that Monday, I had somebody who I had a discovery call with like 3 months prior reach out and say like, oh hey, I finally got my company to pay for coaching, like let's reconnect.
You can't make this up. You can't make this shit
No,
up.
no. And then
No.
since then, I also just had so I had done coaching at Adobe last year where I coached 15 women there. And then like I found out that they wanted me to do it for that organization again. And then one of my former colleagues actually runs like adobe.com, and I had emailed him and I hadn't heard from him. And then like over the weekend he emails me and he's like, oh, I was on sabbatical, but like me and my VP of engineering like think this is great. Like we'd love to do this for our organization too, potentially. And so it's just like, I'm like, okay, I guess I didn't need to do the master class to energetically attract and wait for the invitation. So
Mm. Are you into the like divine masculine, divine feminine energies, or I don't
oh,
know, those?
absolutely. And I've been like, I am so like, it is so hard for me because I have very much, especially in tech, I have very much leaned into my masculine energy side from like the first, 23 years of my adult life or whatever. And it's just like the last 2 years, it's like, how do I lean more into the feminine side? And so like that's why
It's
my business coach is like I had literally hired a business coach who was all about manifesting because I was
yeah.
just like I cannot work with a traditional business coach. Like this is not going to work for me.
Isn't it fascinating? It's like the great mystery. Like the divine feminine and leaning in that way is so much more like having to bypass the brain
Yep.
and like trust and open, and it's mysterious. And I think our, especially if we've been conditioned and trained to trust this so much,
Oh,
it's
yep.
really unraveling, and it's can be wobbly and unsettling.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
it's a practice, but this is also kind of what I love about like Ivy League women, because I think we have been like, particularly like extra, it's been like put on overdrive. And so seeing that sort of bridge and that stepping into
Oh,
more
yeah.
of that, yeah.
And because we've been
Mhm.
taught we should be controlling things, right? And leaning into the
Yes.
divine feminine is all about surrender and letting go of control. And like I said, as projectors, our stuff is like sit there and wait for the invitation. And I'm like, what?
I know, because our culture is built on the like the generators and the like
Yep.
manifesting generators. So yeah, I know. But if you've been reading about the human design, you know that like they're actually saying the collective consciousness and the way that our society is shifting, that the projectors are the ones that are seeing things are going to be the guides.
Yep. The guides for the future. Yep.
Yeah, amen. Hell yeah. Okay, very last question. What is something that you feel you're willing to share with us today that's a little bit edgy in your life?
Ooh, edgy. Well, it's interesting because even like the human design thing, I feel very uncomfortable sharing that, especially with engineering leaders. Like, I think they think I am crazy. Like,
What's all that woo you got in you? Like all the
yeah,
woo
it's
woo
like
stuff.
I have to be very careful to talk about human design and certain like I very much do not talk about that unless I'm like, okay, this seems like a safe space. Like I can bring this up without, but like I would not go into a room of engineering leaders and start talking about human design without like expecting. And so that to me has been like very edgy for me. Is just like I'm gonna talk about this more, and even just talking about like manifesting and leaning into all of that has felt like it's funny because like outside of like this like world, right, there's very much a lot of people who like have no problems talking about this, but
I
you go
know.
into a corporate space and go talk about manifesting things and people are going to be like, what,
I
like,
know. But you know what's interesting, Josie? I believe I agree with you so much. And I also, much like you, I'm like, I better, put on my corporate identity and my, Ivy hat and wear that kind of stuff, those accessories, because that's what builds credibility. And yet, once you get them into safe spaces, you start to realize, do you have to go? I know we're almost at time. I know. We'll cut it on in just a sec. It is that a lot of people are closet spiritual ground like
Oh, yep.
right. So it's starting to bring that into the fold more. So thank you for saying that and sharing that. I'm right there with you on that one, sister. All
Awesome.
right.
Well, this was such a
Well,
good chat. I had so much fun.
same. Thank you for jumping in with me on this. And I don't know, I feel like we got energized right at the end there. This is the stuff that I think as a future follow on, we'll have to do something and
Oh,
bring
I
our
would
human
love
design out.
to. It would be so cool if we had everybody do like their human design blueprints and then like have a conversation about that. Like I've been really geeking out on this recently. So
I would love that too. Have you done a Enneagram?
I have. I am a 5, the investigator.
Ooh, okay. So yeah, you ask a lot of questions. I'm the achiever,
Nice.
the number
Nice.
3. Anyway,
Yep.
that would be another fun one for us to know in our
Yeah,
community
my
what
it's
people
funny,
are.
my Pilates instructor is a 1 and she sees everything very black and white and it's hilarious. And she's like, I'm not a 1, am I? I'm like, yeah, you really are. You really are.
I attract a lot of ones in my life because they can be very perfectionistic and all or nothing. And yeah, that mindset, the reformer. Anyway, well, this was fun. Let's keep the conversation rolling. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I'll follow up with you about the retreat stuff.
Sounds
Can't wait for
good.
that. All right.
Bye.
Bye, Josie.